That is how I'm trying to reach more people. So quick as that goes, we will get started. I do have a master gardener in the other room, and he is on the chat function. So if any of you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and throw them into the chat, and we will get them answered for you. And he will probably send you links to various articles and things of that nature that will help you out. So I am Josh. I'm your residential horticulture agent here in Santa Rosa County. That means that my job is to help you with your lawns, your landscapes, and your anything with the word garden on it is what I'm here to help you with. So, but today we're going to talk about lawns. Oops. All right, so this slide's on here because we are just now finishing up our No Mow March campaign, which was a way of trying to help the local pollinator species out a little bit. Basically, we were asking you not to mow your lawn. We had a sign up for it, and we had a iNaturalist group so everybody could share their pictures with us. But we went ahead and we are done with that for the month. And so now I guess go ahead and mow. Okay, so I'd like to start this class off by telling you that there is a lot of benefit in having a yard. When you go on to different various lawn groups here, what you're going to hear is people say, oh, it's worse than having concrete, and it's worse than that, and it's this, and it's worse than that, and it's worse than the other. That's not necessarily true. So there's a lot of ecological benefit behind having a lawn. It's going to slow down your runoff. It's going to reduce how many contaminants that are in that particular water, rainwater and things of that nature, are coming off of your house. It's going to keep the soil where it's supposed to be, so it's going to reduce erosion, and it's going to recharge our ground and surface water systems. And so it's very important to have those things. Those are very, very good. Sorry, I got distracted. Those are very good benefits, ecological benefits for having your turf grasses. There we go. So here in Florida, we have 5 main types of lawn grasses, and people think there's a lot more, but really there's only the 5. So what we have is bahia, which unless you have horses or pigs or goats or things of that nature, you probably don't even know what bahia is. Essentially, bahia is a pasture grass. It is also sometimes used as a lawn grass, which is why it's in this category, but there's only 2 different types that grow dense enough to actually create a good lawn. The next one we have is Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass is a solid bulletproof grass. The problem with it is that it's very high maintenance. And so you're going to be out there constantly cutting it or constantly watering it or constantly fertilizing it. So it's really fallen out of favor as a turf grass for your lawn. What we do see it more as is on golf courses, we'll see it quite often. And we'll see it on, for instance, they played on it on the Super Bowl. When they played the Super Bowl, that was Bermuda grass, if you're curious. Centipede grass is the next one. It is the most popular up here on the panhandle. And that's because it's very maintenance low. You don't have to hardly do anything to it. It doesn't like a lot of water. It doesn't like a lot of fertilizer. It doesn't like anything like that. The only problem with it is it doesn't necessarily get that real deep green that you might see in other grasses. So it's going to have sort of a lime green color to it. That does not mean that grass is unhealthy. That just means that grass is doing what it does because that's the color of centipede. The next one is St. Augustine, which is the most popular grass in all of Florida. It creates a very nice lawn, very broad blades, very soft looking grass. It's very popular for those reasons. It's also fairly low maintenance, but it doesn't do well in droughts. And so you got to be careful with that kind of thing because we do have about 2 times per year that we're droughty here. And so you got to kind of just be careful of that. The final one is zoysia. Zoysia is quickly taking over for centipede as our most popular grass up here on the panhandle, and for good reason. It's a good solid grass and it gives you a lot of the same benefit as centipede, but at the same time, it gives you that little bit darker green that you're not going to get with your centipede grass. So we can't talk about lawns and we can't talk about gardening and we can't talk about any of these things unless we have some idea of what our soil is like. And so you need to understand the soil is made up of 3 big particles. It's made of sand, it's made of silt, and it's made of clay. And they are sized in that order. Sand is the biggest, silt is the second, and clay is your smallest particle. You may not realize that, but every single soil up here has those 3 particles. including, and you may also not have realized that we have a state soil. The Mayaca is our state soil. It is basically just sand, but there are still all three of those particles are still present because that's just the nature of soils. Here in Santa Rosa County, as you can look at the little chart here on the bottom left, you'll see kind of up where we are, it's a gray and then a dark blue. And there's a little bit of that yellow in there too. That's just a soil map of Florida. And so basically in our county, you're either going to have, I think it's aerosols or ultisols. Ultisols are the ones on the top of the county there. They're very good agronomic soils, which you may notice in Santa Rosa County. The only time that we really get a lot of agriculture is in the north end of the county north of Allentown. You may notice that that's right about where that line is, where those colors change. That's because the soil changes there, and those soils are much more agronomically viable. Aerosols are what we have in the rest of the county for the most part, and they're also pretty good too. They're just a younger soil, which, you know, it's all coming off of the Gulf there, and it's all coming up from the bottom, from the bedrock. And so they're just newer soils is all that really means. That's a whole lot of words to tell you that your soil is going to be different, and there's different types, and there's actually different names for your soils. If you go to the USDA's web soil survey, you can zoom down in on your house, and you can actually look at the soils that are native in your area, and you get an idea. It'll tell you what they're good for on the left side as you pull it up. The best soils in the world and the best soils in the country are in the American Midwest. Those are mollisols. They were years and centuries and millennia of grassland and with free-ranging buffalo. So those are the best ones in the world. We have the second best agronomic soils, and we have really good soils here. They're just very sandy is the issue with them. Because of that, because they're very sandy, they don't hold on to nutrients very well, so you may need to amend them. So this middle picture here, I'm just showing you sort of the soil profile. If you were able to take a glass box and shove it straight into the ground and pull it up, this is what you would see. The very top of that is organic matter, or the O layer as we refer to it. Now here in Florida, the O layer is not very thick because we just don't have a whole lot of organic matter in our soils. So we're really focused on the A horizon and the B horizon because that's where we're going to get most of our root growth, and that's where most of your amendments are going to take effect. So those are the two soil horizons that we're actually concerned with. Now, that's just to give you an idea of how actually shallow it is, and particularly with turfgrass, the roots don't go very deep. So really that A horizon is all you're really worried about. The whole point of that being you don't need to amend too deep. So you may notice here on the very right, we have the sand, silt, and clay. We're talking about soil texture. Because those are all different sizes, again, if you could take that square box and shove it into the ground and pull it out, except for this time, maybe leave it empty, and you threw basketballs in there to simulate your sand, and then baseballs in there to simulate your silt, and then ping pong balls in there to simulate your clay, and mixed all that up and put it in there, you're going to have a lot of airspace. So people never really associate airspace with soils because they always think soil's underground. There's no air. Your plants, every plant that you have needs air in its root zone to survive. And so this is what creates those zones. It's called pore space. Now, there's not just air in those pore spaces. This is where you're going to see, as this little pie chart demonstrates, we have mineral matter in there, we have water, we have air, and we have organic matter. Now, here in Florida, we don't necessarily get that 5% organic matter. We have very low organic matter in our soils. And so that's the type of stuff that you're going to want to amend, but you don't want to amend that on live, currently planted grass to very significant levels year per year. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but this is just to give you an idea of what your soil looks like. And then this quote along the bottom here is Charles Kellogg. He's kind of the father of the USDA Soil Lab. When it comes to soil in America, he's the guy that everybody references. So he's the one that you're going to want to talk about. And actually, you can see if you ever go to Home Depot, lots of the bags of soil that they sell there say Charles Kellogg right on them. Oops. Keep happening. There we go. All right, so kind of the premise of this class is I'm going to show you all the things that can go wrong, and then we're going to talk about how to prevent those things from going wrong. But we're going to talk first, again, we're still in the soil environment here. We're going to talk first about the thatch layer in soil. So the thatch layer is something that you possibly don't even have, but it's something you need to know about. Basically, it's just a buildup of organic matter between where your grass roots should be and where that soil is. You can see it here on the picture on the right. where there is that black arrows coming in is pointing directly at the thatch layer. That is just a bunch of organic matter that didn't get the chance to decompose and therefore is actually inhibiting grass growth. The way that you're going to know that you have that is because you're going to have very spongy grasses in your soil. That's the easiest way to know. The second easiest way to know is to use a probe like they're using here on the left side picture. And all they did was shove that down, and you can see there's a big layer of thatch in there as well. Now, I don't want you to think that just because you have thatch, there's nothing to do about it. You can go to Home Depot, you can go to Lowe's, you can go to Manning's, you can go to any of these equipment rental companies here in the county, and you can rent what we call a vertical mower. Now, they are going to have adjustable blades in there, and you're going to need to know how deep your thatch is so that you can adjust the blades to that. You want those blades to be scraping that thatch out of them, which is going to look similar to what's going on in this picture. But that's the idea behind that. It's basically just a mower, but instead of the blade spinning horizontally, they spin vertically and they rip all that out of your soil. Keep all that. That's all very good for your compost piles. You just don't want it in between your grasses and your soils. Now, once you do that, you can top dress a little bit, and I would recommend top dressing with sand and sand only. The reason you do that is because it's inert. There's no inherent nutritive value or anything like that. So if you just do sand, the whole point of that is to sort of level out your lawn a little bit, and that just gives a little bit more surface area for all those microbes to live on, so that when you do get organic matter, because of course, as we're going to talk about, you always leave your clippings on your grass when you cut. But this gives the microbial stuff that's going on in your soil more of a place to live, and lets it get a little bit more prolific, is all the whole purpose behind it. Now, another issue that can go on with soil is compaction. Compaction is essentially that soil has been squished so much that none of those air spaces are now available. They've all been compressed. And you're going to tell me, or a lot of people tell me, that you can't compact sand. You absolutely can. And it's been known to happen. I was in the Air Force for years, and I was digging in Saudi Arabia, and I broke 3 pickaxes in their sand. So I'm here to tell you, you can compact sand. It definitely can happen. The reason we don't want that is for the same reason we don't want thatch. It's going to inhibit water and nutrients and air and all those other things from infiltrating into that soil. So an easy, simple way to test for that is, you see this picture here with the screwdriver. You take a screwdriver, and if you can't very easily poke it into your sand all the way down to the handle, you probably have some compaction issues. So what you need to understand about compaction, which is kind of illustrated here in this picture on the right, is that just because it's not compacted right where you're standing doesn't mean it's not compacted 2 or 3 feet away from you. Point of that being, you're going to need to sample your entire lawn to figure out whether or not you have a compaction issue. So speaking of this picture on the right, this is actually in Milton. This was a few years ago. And what happened here is they dug a trench for a water pipe through right there where it's very green and very nice looking grass. Because they did that, they knocked all that compaction out. So you may see on either side of that line, that's all very compacted soil, or at least mildly compacted soil, versus here in the middle, it's all very loose and fluffy and very good, very conducive to growth. And you can see how much of a difference just that makes in your lawn. So how do we solve that problem? Again, while you're at Lowe's and Home Depot, you can rent, while you're renting your vertical mower, you can rent an aerator. Now, you're going to want to make sure that you use the plug style aerator, which is going to have about a 1/2 to 3/4 inch plug that it's going to take out, which are these basically what it takes out is what's down here on the left, on the bottom left. You want to make sure that you get that because you want good, nice open spaces. Now, Amazon sells a thing that you can slap onto your shoes. It's a bunch of spikes, and you can go walk around your lawn, and they claim that that's aeration. I wouldn't trust that. Go ahead and go with the plug style here. It's going to open that soil up very efficiently. You can take these plugs and you can put them in an area that you have maybe some grass dying back, because they're going to be basically vegetative propagation at that point. So that's the way to solve compaction. You only really need to do that or vertical mowing. You'd want to do it in the spring when things are starting to wake up. So I would probably do it in another 2 weeks, 3 weeks or so, about mid-April, when we're done with all this cold stuff we've been having coming through. That's when you would want to do these types of things. We worry about doing it before that because you don't want to stress your grass and then have it go into a cold spell. It's just not good for it. All right, so this picture is, the whole point of this slide is to drive home what your root system should look like versus what it might look like if you're having issues. Here on the left, you see those roots they're nice, they're pretty, they're white, they have all sorts of root hairs on them. Those are perfectly good, healthy roots. They're exactly what you want. The only tissue on any plant that's really capable of absorbing water and nutrients is the root. So a healthy root zone is extremely important. On the right here, they've actually gotten a fungal disease called take-all root rot, and those roots are dead. So if you ever see brown spots in your lawn and you go out there and you sort of pick some of the grass up, and you can look at it, unless those roots look like the ones here on the left, you have dead roots. If you have dead roots, you're not going to have good grass. So speaking of take-all root rot, that's what this is. I know it's a very long name. The common name is take-all root rot. It's a fungal disease. Fungal diseases move in anytime you have very stressed grass. So if you're over irrigating, if you're over fertilizing, if you're stressing that grass out in any way, you open yourself up to risk for fungal issues. This particular one, we can't really do anything about. So all that grass, the way it turned black right there, is going to have to come out, and you're going to have to put new grass in. It's unfortunately, there's just not a fungicide out there for this particular disease. But it's very preventable if we keep our grasses not stressed. Now, insects, everybody's favorite thing. If you have St. Augustine grasses, you have a risk of what we call chinch bug. That's the grass that they attack more than anything. And so what they do is they get down there and they're nymphs, which is what we call them, which is what this picture is with the red and white striped bugs. It's basically the juvenile version of these chinch bugs. They'll get in there and they have a piercing sucking mouth part, which means that they're going to, like a hypodermic needle, they're going to plug into the roots of your grasses and they're going to suck all the sap out of it and all the juices out of it. So if you start to see a lot of big dieback areas, like we have right here in this picture, in the picture of the middle of the adult chinch bug and the baby chinch bug, then that might be something you suspect if you have St. Augustine grasses. Now, certainly chinch bugs are not the only insect that happens with. The point of this slide is to give you an idea of what insect damage looks like. Another one that we have is ground pearls, and these tend to attack centipede grasses more than anything else. And you're going to notice these because you're going to have these little tiny streaky type areas, almost zebra looking areas in your lawn. There's not a whole lot we can do about these. It's a scale insect. They've only recently really been discovered, and we're doing a lot of research to try to figure out what to do about them. But we can still throw some pesticides down and try to kill them off at least. You may note that the only way you're even going to know that you have them is you see this little reddish looking blob over here. That is the actual female. And that's the only way you're going to know you have them. And you can see that they're gigantic because they fit in between Washington's face and the side of that quarter. So they're very huge, obviously. We would need microscopy to even find these. So if you can actually bring us a sample of your grass, if you're seeing these types of symptoms, we can look under microscopes and we can help you decipher whether or not this is your issue. If it is your issue, then we can talk about different ways to deal with it. Again, there's not a great way to kill these. It's just kind of something that you need to know about. Mole crickets. Nobody's ever had problems with mole crickets in Florida. This is just a cricket and it creates damage in your lawn just like a mole would. You're going to get those little tunnels and those little areas running through your yard that are raised. Honestly, the easiest way to prevent even getting these guys is to shut your lights off at dusk. If you shut them off for an hour or two, if you have a pool or something like that and it's got lights, shut those lights off for a couple hours at dusk. That's when these fly. And when they're flying, they are attracted to light. So they will try to zoom in on your lights. So that's one of the easiest ways to prevent them. These are extremely treatable. We know all kinds of things about mole crickets. And so if this is an issue that you're having, if you bring it to us here at the extension office, we can go ahead and get this solved for you, or at least get a management strategy out there for you. Now, grubs. A lot of people don't understand that grubs are just the larval form of a beetle. So one way to know that you're even having grub issues is if you're noticing a lot of beetles around your property, you probably have grub issues. And so We're going to need to treat it. These are, again, very treatable. A couple signs that actually you might know that you have these is if you're seeing a lot of armadillo action. So you're seeing a lot of tiny little holes dug in your yard. That's probably an armadillo that's trying to eat these. And so if we treat for these, that can hopefully help prevent some of the armadillos from coming in there and causing damage and preventing some of the damage that these actually cause. Because again, they're going to eat the roots on your grass and then your grasses aren't going to be able to thrive. Nematodes. Nematodes are an issue in Florida for sure, but they're probably not an issue that you actually have. So we have three main types. Now there's a whole bunch of nematodes out there in the world, but there's three main types that are actually detrimental to Florida lawn grass. The first one is root knot nematode. These are, well, if you don't know, nematodes are microscopic worms, essentially. And so these are going to live in the top, say, inch and a half of your soil. There are nematicides that you can put down, and they're very effective against root knot nematode. And so if we're seeing damage from those, they're extremely treatable. Left untreated, it can cause damage. That's what's happening here on the bottom right picture that you have on your screen. That's actually a golf course. But if you're seeing something like that in your lawn, there's a good chance you have sting nematodes. Or I'm sorry, not sting nematodes, root knot nematodes. And we can go ahead and treat for those. Those are extremely easy to treat. Lance nematodes don't cause anywhere near the amount of damage that root knot nematode has. The only problem with them is they're very hard to treat for. They actually live in the soil and they live in your grasses at different points in their life stage. And so they're one of those things that you're gonna have to treat and treat and treat and treat and treat and hope that you catch them when they're out in the soil. There's just really not a good way to do it otherwise. The nice thing is they don't cause a lot of damage. So as long as you can keep their population kind of in check, you're gonna be fine. Lance nematodes, and this is just to give you an idea of what nematodes even look like, is this bottom blue picture here on the left. Those are Lance nematodes. Now that is through a microscope that is very, very, very magnified. This is not something you're going to see with your naked eye. The last one is sting nematodes, which are the largest threat to our turf grasses here, but they spend their entire life in the soil. Root knot nematodes, they're extremely treatable. We just have to catch them at the right time of year because they like to dive deep whenever it gets cold and then come back up when it gets warm. So we just have to catch them at the right time of year and we can definitely treat for those. We do have, if you suspect you have nematode issues, University of Florida has a nematode assay lab. And so we can get a sample and send it off to them and they can tell you an estimated population level and what types are in your soil. So if you're suspecting this is an issue, give me a call myself or one of my master gardeners, and we can work through this with you and get it sent off to get tested. Okay, weeds. Sure, nobody out there has got weed issues. So there's a couple of things that are going on with weeds. There's a couple of different types of weeds. So what we have pictured here on the left is globe sedge. That is a very, very, very common weed that you probably have, and no, it is not the one that's going to dry out and stick in your foot in the middle of summer. That's actually called burrweed. These are just seed heads. They don't really get sharp or anything like that. It's a type of sedge, so we're going to have to use a sedge-based herbicide. There are herbicides designed specifically for sedges. The other picture here, I'm sure most of you know what it is. It's dollarweed. It's actually an aquatic plant. It's a native plant to Florida, but it's an aquatic plant. So one of the easiest ways to get rid of a lot of this is to reduce your watering. And we're going to talk about irrigation in a little bit. But most people here are overwatering. I can almost guarantee you that you're overwatering. And so if you reduce that watering, a lot of this will die back naturally. Now there are herbicides for this. When it comes to herbicides, there's a couple of things we need to talk about. One, you never, ever, 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 ever want to use a product called weed and feed. The reason you don't want to use that is because it's a generalized herbicide and we don't know if it's actually targeting any of the weeds in your lawn. So when we come after weeds in your lawn, we want to know specifically what it is so that we can pick out the chemicals that work specifically for that weed. On top of that, why would you fertilize or feed the weeds that you're trying to kill? It doesn't make any sense to do that. You may very well give them enough efficacy to make it through that herbicide cycle. So we want to avoid doing that. So not using weed and feed is our recommendation. It's just too general and it's not a good idea. and you may cause more damage than you think just by using it. So we don't do that. What we do is we figure out what your weeds are, and then we pick the best chemical for those weeds. Now, those herbicides come in a couple of different flavors. There is broadleaf and grass weed herbicides. Broadleafs obviously attack things like your dollar weed here. And then your grass weeds would be if you still had some annual ryegrass that you needed to kill off, or if you had some crabgrass or something of those nature. That's the definition and the delineation mark there. So we need to make sure that we're using the right type that way. Again, on top of that, there's selective and non-selective. That's exactly what it says. Selective is going to be a certain set of chemicals that's designed to kill exactly one weed or two weeds or three weeds. And all that will be written on the bottle. And if you call us, we're going to give you the chemical names, and then you'll be able to go out there and shop a little bit smarter for that. But that's it. And then on top of that, we have pre-emergence and post-emergent. Pre-emergence is going to happen about mid-February to the beginning of March, and then also again in October. When you put that down, you're going to apply it once, and then you're going to wait about 6 to 8 weeks and apply it again. The next round of that should come in October. And if you apply that in October, then come this time next year, you shouldn't have near the weed problems that you're having right now. We're lucky here in Florida in that we have 2 seasons of weeds. So that gets applied twice a year. The post-emergent basically is if I can see the weed, then I know I need to use the post-emergent. On top of that, integrated pest management. Integrated pest management is a 4-tiered approach to pest management. And this isn't just weeds. This is weeds, insects, fungus, all of it. The four tiers are cultural controls. Cultural controls are things like reducing your watering, making sure that you're fertilizing appropriately, making sure you're mowing at the correct height, keeping those plants as nice and stress-free as you possibly can. It's also referring to eliminating anything that might be used as habitat in your area. So if you have standing water, you know that that's going to attract insects. So that's the kind of stuff you need to get away. If you have a section of your lawn that won't drain properly, then you need to do something about that. We would call that a cultural control. The second is mechanical controls. Mechanical controls are literally you pulling the weed or taking that insect up and throwing it into a bucket full of soapy water to kill it. It's actually you physically removing that pest from that environment. It's the most effective way to do it, but it's also the most labor intensive. And so it's not always the best one. Chemical controls are the third tier. Chemicals are very important. They're a very important aspect to this IPM thing that we're talking about. But we want to exhaust the other 3 tiers before we look into chemicals. The reason for that being, let's say I had a rose bush that was full of thrips, and I sprayed it with a pesticide to kill off all the thrips, but I only managed to kill 98% of them. Well, I left 2% of them there that are now a chemical resistant population that are able to procreate upon themselves and create a huge population that is resistant to that chemical. That's the reason that we want to exhaust the other 3 tiers before we get to chemicals. Now, the final one, the fourth one, I leave it to last because it's my favorite, is biological controls. Biological controls can be as simple as put up a birdhouse. Birds eat bugs. It's just nature. That's how it works. Other bugs eat bugs. If you can build habitat for predatory insects that are going to kill off the things that are damaging your lawn or damaging your landscape plants, that's a good idea. One of the things that people don't like to think about is wasps. They're very good in this regard as they are parasitoid, which means that they plant their babies on the adult insects that you want dead. Those babies hatch and eat that insect and eliminate it from your landscape. So wasps, in my personal view of wasps are, if you're at my front door, you're going to die. But if you're out in a tree, then we can be neighbors, as long as you're not bugging my kids or anything like that. That's my personal view on wasps. A really fun one that I don't think we actually have around here, but it's one that's kind of creepy, is actually a fungus that can infect an ant, and it will take over that ant's brain and make that ant crawl to the top of a tree, and then the ant puts itself up in the tree as high as it can and allows that fungus to spread because it gets the wind flow up at a higher level. So that one's just kind of weird. I don't think we actually have it around here, but it's just trying to let you know there's a lot of weird stuff out there in nature. So as far as our actual cultural controls, the things that we can control, the things that we can do to make our lawn grasses more healthy. Irrigation is probably the most important and probably something that people don't put a lot of thought to. They just think, oh, I'll just throw that timer on 3 times a week and it'll water and that'll be the end of it. It's actually the most destructive practice that we have for turfgrass. Our lawns and our soils are a delicate balance of how much water they hold and how much water the plant can use and how much water they're losing at any given day. And so down here in this graph, what our goal is to say kind of right in the middle of between there where it says field capacity and permanent wilting point. Field capacity refers to how much water that soil can hold before it becomes standing water. And so we don't want standing water on our property. So we want to keep it below the field capacity, but at the same time, we want enough irrigation and enough water in there so that it's actually going to feed the plants without having them die back and without killing them off. And so we need to stay between these 2 lines. And so how do you know how to do that? Oh, sorry, I forgot these out of order. Well, first of all, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're getting complete coverage on our sprinkler systems and our irrigation systems. So what's happening here on the picture on the left is you're going to see that there's a slight discoloration in the middle of that long area. What's happening is the irrigation is not hitting that spot. And so that water is starved for water. That grass is starved for water, which is why you see that slight color change, which we're going to talk about on the next slide here, the 3 signs that you need to irrigate. And so this other one over here is pouring off into the street. My parents just built a house here in Milton. The neighbors' sprinklers do this. At least 3 of the heads do this, and it drives me nuts. I want to go fix them every day. Make sure that you're not doing this. If you're pouring it into the street, it's just going into the Gulf of Mexico and it's not helping your lawn at all. But how do we know when we even need to turn those systems on? There are 3 signs that your grass needs water, that your grass wants water. And as you get aware of these signs and as you start to kind of pay attention a little bit, it'll become much more temporal in that you'll be able to say, okay, it's been 5 days since I watered, so I need to water because I know that my grass likes to dry out at about 5 days. But your grass blades are going to fold up. You're going to see the color change, just like we saw in the picture on that last slide. And then you'll see they do that because as the grass folds, the light hits it differently and it just gives it kind of a blue sheen. And then you'll see lingering impressions. So let's say you got home from work, you grabbed your groceries, you ran inside, you looked outside at your lawn 5 or 10 minutes later, and your footprints are still in the lawn. There's just not enough water in those blades to refill, which is why your footprint are still there. When we do water, we only need 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, but that needs to be in the root zone. So you just need to make sure that that water that you apply is getting down into the root zone, which is about, on turf grasses, about 4 inches deep or so is where you need to be. Now I know that that doesn't sound like a lot of water, but if you look at this picture on the bottom right here, you'll see that 3/4 of an inch of water applied to a landscape will actually saturate the top 8 to 9 inches of soil. So it's a lot more than it sounds like, but at the same time, it's a lot less than you need to apply. So the people that are saying, oh, I just turned the sprinklers on because my landscape company told me to do that, and I run them for an hour or 2 hours or however long, they're probably incorrect because they're probably watering more than they need to. And when that water sits there and saturates it, it just can create fungal issues. At the same time, if you water too often, what you're going to get, in other words, if you're watering not seeing these 3 signs, what you're going to get is the picture here on the left. The root zone here on the left of this picture that's on the left is watered very frequently, watered more than it needs to be. You'll notice that they has very shallow root systems. So what do you think is going to happen to those root systems as we hit a drought? And we do get droughty here about twice a year. So those are not going to do as well in a drought. Those are now reliant on you to water very often. If, on the other hand, you are watering at the appropriate times and in the appropriate amounts, what you're going to get is the right side of this picture, which is very nice, long, deep root systems. Those are going to do much better in droughts. Now, how do you know how much water your system is putting out? Well, we recommend that you take some straight-sided cans, be they tuna cans, cat food cans, whichever type. Oops, what's going on right now? My computer's going all blinky on me. Put those out in those irrigation zones. run that irrigation for 15 minutes, and then see how much water is put out by your irrigation system. You can adjust based on that. So if you put it out there for 15 minutes and your cans are overflowing, you know you don't need to run it for 15 minutes. There's a good chance you're going to put it out there for 15 minutes and you're going to get about 1/4 of an inch. So half an hour is probably the right time, but make sure that you do this so that you know and you're not guessing. Now, you need to balance how much irrigation you're applying with how much rain we get. And you need to understand that you live in the rainiest part of Florida. We get about 68 inches a year. We get more rain than Miami does. I know that they're famous for being rainy and having a rainy season, but we get more rain than they actually do. So you need to balance that with the irrigation that you're applying. A good way to do that is to install a rain sensor, which you may not know is actually a statute here in Florida. That's not to say that the police are going to come and arrest you if you don't have a rain sensor. But if you go and apply for a permit and the inspector happens to see that you don't have one, he might say something to you and might mandate that you get one. And any new building that you have is going to have one. Now, as far as fertilization, which is the second most destructive practice in all of lawn care, the very first thing you need to know, if you know nothing else about your lawn, is what the pH is for your soil. The reason that's important is because it speaks to the availability of those nutrients that you apply in that soil. And each of our soils here have different levels they like to be. For instance, centipede grass actually doesn't like a lot of fertilizer. And so we ask that you get that one, if we can, as close to 5.5 and 6 as you can possibly get it. That's the range we want to be in for centipede grass. And the reason is it just likes that acidity and it likes that level of nutrient availability. When we get into our zoysias, we like to be closer to 6.5. And I think St. Augustine is also about 6.5. The point is that you need to know your pH. And I can do that test for you in the office here for free. If you take a garden trowel and you dig about 15 to 20 spots in whatever area you're looking for, throw all that into a bucket, mix it together. I need about 2 cups of it, throw it into a Ziploc bag, keep that Ziploc bag open on your porch overnight so it can dry out. Please don't microwave it or put it in the oven. I wish I didn't have to say that, but it's happened. But just leave it on your front porch with the bag open overnight and then bring it to us the next day or the following day or whenever you get a minute to bring it to us. We'll test it for you and then we'll call you and we'll say, hey, this was the level of your pH. This is the grass you're growing. These are the kind of things you need to do. If your pH is just way out of whack, we can send it off to the University of Florida and have them test it. They will test for pH also, but they'll also give you a liming requirement, which we can't give you here because it requires some chemicals that we're just not allowed to have. And they will give you whatever nutrients are in that soil. So if you'd like to skip us and go straight to them, that's fine. We're not going to be offended, but we're free. And that one costs $10 plus shipping. So if you just want to know your pH of your soil, you can go ahead and bring it to us and we can do that. The reason you might want to send it off to UF, at least the first time, is right here. And these are the old forms. These are the old soil reports that you don't get these anymore. Now it just says high, medium, and low. But I like these because it's very illustrative of what's going on. If you are the guy that's in here on the right and all of your nutrients are spiked as high as they can go and you're throwing down fertilizer, you risk the possibility of creating a toxic environment for your plants because there's too much fertilizer down there. And you're also wasting money because this guy didn't need to fertilize at all. If on the other hand, you're the guy here on the left and you didn't fertilize because you said, oh, I don't want to fertilize, I don't want to spend the money, you're doing a detriment to your grass. This whole point of this slide is to hammer home how important soil testing is. So when we do fertilize, what we do is we ask you to only fertilize from April 15th to September 15th. The reason for that, you'll see on the chart down here, where you start to get really good healthy root growth is right at the end of spring, or right in the beginning of spring rather. And so that's going to translate to about April 15th. And then when you see those roots starting to die back again, that's going to be the beginning of fall, which is going to translate to about September 15th. Roots are the only tissue in a plant capable on a large scale of absorbing water and nutrients. So if there are no roots present, we don't need to fertilize because we're not doing anything except for having that fertilizer go straight through your soil and into the Gulf of Mexico. So that's why we ask that you only fertilize at those times. On top of that, you need to understand that our soil recommendations are nitrogen, because that's the soil, that's the element that's going to fly through your soil the fastest. So at worst, what we're telling you to do is apply a certain amount of nitrogen to your lawn space per 1,000 square feet per year. It's not every month, not anything like that. You're going to want to put about 2 to 3 applications out for the year. For instance, centipede grass, we will tell you to put about 1 pound per 1,000 square feet per year down. And so you're going to do that starting April 15th. You'll put about 1/3 of a pound in. And then June, assuming it's not too hot, so you're going to want to do this early June, late May, early June, put down that second 1/3 of a pound. And then as we get through all those really hot summer months and things start to cool down a little bit, as we get into September, I'd put down that 3rd application of 1/3 of a pound. On top of that, when you do that, look for a fertilizer that's about 1/3 to half slow release. And that's going to give you that fertilizer throughout that entire growing season. Now for St. Augustine and for Zoysia, we have different recommendations. It's just that for centipede, it's 1 pound per 1,000 square feet per year. The way that you know how much nitrogen is in a bag of fertilizer, there's 3 big numbers on the front of every bag of fertilizer. Those translate to nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Phosphorus is an element that, Florida is where they mine phosphorus. So we generally don't need a lot of that. That's the importance of soil testing, but we generally don't worry too much about that middle number. We're really worried about the nitrogen. And so that very first number is the percentage of nitrogen that's in that bag. And so if you get a 15, 15, 15, that means there's 15% of the weight of that bag is nitrogen. There is no, and you'll hear people say, well, I use 666 or 888 or 10, 10, 10. It doesn't matter. It's nitrogen. It's going to be, hopefully you got that 1/3 to half slow release in there, and it'll tell you on the bag if it is. It's really just a matter of whatever your application device is and the size of your lawn. So you might, if you have a really small lawn, you might use 666 so that you can need to use more of it, essentially, to fill whatever application device you have. If you have a bigger lawn, you might use 10, 10, 10 because you know you're going to throw a lot in there. It really depends on what your application device is and how calibrated it is and things like that. Okay, mowing. This is a lawn practice that's actually overlooked quite a bit. If you mow your lawn at the wrong height, you're actually doing it a disservice. And so you can see on the picture on the bottom left here, that's Bermuda grass. That's actually a research plot. That's Bermuda grass that they have cut too short perfectly and too high. The one on the left there is too short. The problem with that is they've taken off too much of that grass blade. That grass can't photosynthesize. It's just not healthy because it can't get enough photosynthese. In the middle is perfect. They've mowed it at exactly the right height. There's enough grass blade there that it can photosynthesize, but not so much that it's going to shade itself out, which is what's going on the right side of this picture. Those grasses are too high on the right side, and it's shading out the grass, and it's, again, not getting optimal sunlight. This picture here in the middle is probably my favorite picture because I like to imagine the 2 dads in these 2 houses arguing with one another about how high to mow your grass. But that's the same grass across both of their lawns. One of them is appropriately mowed, one of them is inappropriately mowed. You can see that the appropriately mowed one is green, it's lush, it's nice, it's thick. The inappropriately mowed one has got kind of a yellow color to it. You can tell that it's healthy-ish, but it's not quite as healthy as it could be. And so that's why that's one of my favorite pictures. When we do talk about it, you're going to wind up mowing about once a week in the summer when we're in the heavy growing season, but we don't want to take off more than 1/3 of those blades at a time. So let's say you had to miss a week of mowing and your grass grew 4 inches in that time frame. Set your mower to a height that's only going to take off 1/3 of that blade. Go back a few days later and mow again, and just keep taking that 1/3 of a blade down until you get to the height that you're supposed to be in. Otherwise, you risk shocking the plants, and it can turn bad in a hurry. It also puts a whole bunch of organic matter back on your lawn, because remember, we tell you to leave the lawn clippings on there. Use a mulching blade and leave the lawn clippings on there. And that's just to add some organic matter, because again, we don't have a whole lot of organic matter here in our soils. When you talk about how high to mow, always take a tape measure to the bed of your mower. I have a beautiful brand new John Deere zero-turn mower with a 60-inch mow bed on it. I bought it last year. I still took a tape measure to the bed of that to make sure it was at the appropriate height. Never trust any of the numbers that anybody puts on any of your equipment. Always double check them, always measure. These are just a couple of fun pictures as a bonus to you. I want you to know a couple of things. For one, this picture on the left is not a disease. It's not an insect. It's not anything that's necessarily detrimental to this grass system. I think what's happening here, you can see there's a lot of shade on that grass. That particular spot probably gets shady all day. I'm going to bet you in the morning that the spot where the shade is currently is actually sunny. And I'm going to bet you in the afternoon that this spot that it just doesn't get any sun. And so because it does, or as much sun as it likes. And because it doesn't get as much sun as it likes, it's just a dead spot. It's gone dormant. Maybe it's gotten too cold. Maybe it just hasn't gotten enough light. The point of that is not every brown spot is an insect or a disease. Sometimes it's just that your grass has gone dormant. This other picture cracks me up because it's a perfectly rectangular area of these people's lawn. What's happening there, and if you guys were in a live class, this is when I try to get you to guess what's happening. But what's happening right there is that there was a sidewalk on there and the grass grew over it. And so because there's concrete between the bottom of that grass and the top of that soil, there's no contact, and therefore that grass is unhealthy and has turned yellow. Be wary of what could possibly be buried in your lawn. I have a master gardener who's one of my really good grass guys, and he usually works on Mondays here in the plant clinic. He told me he bought his house. 10 years later, the soil had kind of settled and couldn't quite figure out why everything was starting to yellow so much. And finally, it all started to die off and he couldn't figure it out. And he said pH spiked and he didn't know what was going on. Come to find out, he dug down into that grass a little bit and the builder had dumped all the brick in the middle of their yard and just buried it. And over time, that soil had eroded or settled enough to where it was actually starting to become an issue. So you need to be aware of what's in your lawn. Sometimes it's going to be those kinds of issues, and we can help you troubleshoot that and try to figure out if that's what's going on. Okay, so I am out of slides and out of things to tell you. So let me just make sure that everything in here is getting answered. I'm sure that Larry is doing a good job, but I'm just going to look back through here. Proper height to mozoisha. That's going to be 1 3/4 to 2 inches. Right there, he said it. Yep. Okay, prune annually to remove dead or discolored. Okay, it looks like he's answered them all, so I'm not going to go through all these. One thing I do want to leave you with is if you go to Google and you type in the Florida Lawn Handbook and then the letters IFAS, you can get access to every document the University of Florida has on all of your different maintenance practices. There's going to be a document in there about how to mow and when to mow. There's going to be a document in there about proper irrigation techniques, proper fertilization techniques. There's going to be primers on each of the different types of grass. It's a very good, very useful resource to you, and it's all open to you. And of course, you can call myself or my master gardeners whenever you'd like to if you have any questions with it. The only one that's not in there is centipede grass. And if you go back into Google and you just type centipede grass and then those same 4 letters, IFAS, we do have a document on centipede grass, but for whatever reason, it's not in there. I don't know why. One thing I can tell you, because it's kind of new research and it's not really prolifically out there yet, is if you need to resod an area or if you need to resprig or if you need to spread grass anywhere and you're not going to do it by seed, try to go to one of these documents and pick out 4 different cultivars of that grass. The reason for that being is that some of them stay green longer, some of them don't like quite as much water, some of them are more pest resistant. If you can mix those up in your lawnscape, you're going to have a much healthier lawn overall. And so I will open it up now if anybody wants to try to turn their mic on and actually ask me a question. I'll give you a few minutes to do that, but I am finished. Okay, I guess there's no questions, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop the show now. Thank you for tuning in. Your master gardeners are here whenever you need us to help. Go ahead and give us a call. You can call us, you can come in, you can email us. Our email is out there on the Santa Rosa County Extension website, and we will have a big presence at the flower show that's starting tomorrow. So I'll have 2 booths there, one talking about family or Florida friendly landscaping, and the other one talking about the Master Gardener program, which I am taking applications for right now. So if you'd like to be a Master Gardener and you go to the Santa Rosa County Extension page, the application is right there in the Master Gardener volunteer information. So I hope everybody had a good day, and I hope you learned something, and thank you for tuning in.
Yes, thank you.